ahead and call to order this Tuesday, June 4th meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission. We'll take the roll.
Ms. Fuller?
Here.
Mr. Willis is absent. Ms. Brown?
Here.
Ms. Marshall?
Here.
Ms. Austin?
Here.
Mr. Freemeyer?
Here.
Mr. Patinos?
Here.
Mr. Kenton?
Here.
And Chair Townley.
Here. Okay. Next, we'll move on to the approval of the May 21st minutes. Do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
In a second.
Second.
Any discussion or edits?
Okay. Ms. Fuller?
Yes.
Ms. Brown?
Yes.
Ms. Marshall?
Abstain.
Ms. Austin?
Yes.
Mr. Patinos?
Yes.
Mr. Freemeyer?
Aye.
Mr. Kenton?
Yes.
And Chair Townley.
Yes. Okay, next we have public forum. This is an opportunity for anyone in the audience who wishes to address the commission on issues other than what would be in the next two public hearings. If so, we ask you to come forward to the podium. And anyone here for public forum? Not seeing one? Okay. So we will move forward to item number 5. Public hearing case 2017-3, short-term rental regulations, with Eric Sampson.
Sorry.
Do we have a motion to open the public hearing?
I move the public hearing be open.
Second. Ms. Fuller?
I'm sorry.
It's a vote on opening the public, motion to open the public hearing. You're fine.
Yes.
Thank you. Ms. Brown?
Yes.
Ms. Marshall?
Yes.
Ms. Austin?
Yes.
Mr. Patinos?
Yes.
Mr. Freemeyer?
Aye.
Mr. Kenton?
Yes.
And Chair Townley.
Yes. Now we'll hear from staff.
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm under the penalty of perjury that you will tell the truth in this proceeding before the Planning and Zoning Commission?
I do.
Please state your name.
Eric Sampson. All right, so short-term rentals. So just to give you a brief background on this. We might as well start off with the basics. What is a short-term rental? So a short-term rental is a dwelling unit or portion thereof, say a room, basement, etc., that's rented to guests on a nightly, weekly, or for a duration of less than 30 consecutive days. Short-term rentals are limited to single-family dwellings, duplexes, townhomes, condos, and sometimes, depending on the community, accessory dwelling units. These are, they don't include, say, motels, hotels, other establishments that were designed for, say, short periods of stay or things like that. It also does not include RVs or bed and breakfasts. Oftentimes, many communities have a stipulation in which the primary residence to the short-term rental must be an accessory use to primary residence, meaning that the person cannot own a house and live in Hawaii and then rent out their property in Englewood as a short-term rental. So that is oftentimes prohibited. For planning and zoning, staff originally brought short-term rental discussion to you back in 2017. And over the past couple of years, we've been kind of going back and forth and kind of looking at the regulations and doing staff's been doing STR research. And so I think we finally have to a place where planning and zoning is comfortable moving forward with the recommendation on these short-term rental regulations. Before we go on to that, just a little background on short-term rentals. In Englewood, they have been increasing in popularity, and not just in Englewood along the entire Front Range, as the Front Range has seen more population boom in the last few years, also in tourism. So these are becoming fairly commonplace. And as of right now, I think it's worth noting is that Englewood right now doesn't have anything in their zoning code which would regulate the short-term regulation use. And due to the popularity of sites such as Airbnb, HomeAway, Turnkey, etc., there's a plethora of kind of home sharing, home rental websites out there now. And if you go on any one of them, you would see a number of those properties are listed in Englewood. So they're there, they're taking place, and so what would be some of the benefits for allowing short-term rentals in Englewood? So right now, they're currently not allowed by zone. So it does increase lodging options for visitors and tourists. It addresses the need for accommodations in an area where quality lodging options do not exist. Englewood does not have, say, a hotel. It also provides housing options for short-term stays. And this is something that we've kind of come across in our research. And then recently we noticed that patients that need to come to Swedish for, say, a week or two stay for treatment and things like that are looking for a place to stay that fits that type of accommodation. Same with traveling nurses. We get that a lot where nurses will come in for a matter of 3 weeks to a month and then they're off to a different hospital. So we can definitely see an impact in short-term rentals by the presence of Swedish and Craig in the city. And just being able to have some sort of accommodation for those types of instances. So STRs also provide rental income for the owner and also provides lodging and sales tax to the city. So some of the concerns that we've had regarding short-term rentals, we did have an open house regarding short-term rentals back in October. We also had a short-term rental forum where we had individuals from different cities who had implemented short-term rentals come and speak to those interested here. So some of those, out of those couple of hearings we heard, were the concerns regarding party houses, where there's a lot of people staying in a small space, high occupancy. There is a lot of noise and other nuisances, including impacts to on-street parking and so on. And again, so the short-term rental uses is currently unregulated by city zoning code. That being said, some of the benefits of having short-term rental regulations can include they require each short-term rental to have a permit which is issued by the city. In this case, it would be the Community Development Department. And these would be valid for 12 months, and they would be subject to annual renewal. And they would also help establish uniform operating standards for each STR, so everyone is playing with the same rule book, if you will. And it would also allow us to make STRs an accessory use to a primary residence, and that would just be to, in effect, better to regulate, say, outside absentee landlords coming in and purchasing a property and using those residences for strictly a rental purpose. This would also allow us to limit occupancy. It would also allow us to establish parking requirements for any STR, and it would also allow and give the city the right to revoke STR permits for nuisance or non-compliant properties. So in the draft regulations, which you have attached to your staff report, I'm just going to go through kind of the highlights of what will be required to obtain a short-term rental permit and kind of what our standards are that we have written to the draft in terms of short-term rental operating procedures. So first off, you would obviously require to submit an application and a processing fee, which we determine at a later date. We also require them to provide proof of ownership, and they would also be required to sign a notarized acknowledgement of property compliance. And that includes compliance with all city codes and ordinances. It includes a safety checklist. I've actually included a draft of this checklist in your staff report. And also an acknowledgement that the city has the right of inspection at any time at a reasonable time. We would also require a scale floor plan of the short-term rental. That would be to let us know how many bedrooms there are that could potentially be rented out and what that max occupancy could be. That would also include a scale plan for the property to include parking areas, to determine if they have off-street parking available for short-term rentals or if they would need to be utilizing on-street parking, which is a subject I'll get to in just a second. They'll also be required to have valid tax license. This includes Colorado and Englewood sales tax and Englewood lodging sales tax licenses. So some of the operating standards that are in the draft that you have in front of you, again, we feel pretty strongly that this must be the primary residence of an STR. They need to live in that property for the majority of the time, and they can't be absentee landowners or corporations trying to rent out houses for short-term rental purposes. Also, we establish that STR shall not exceed 2 adults per bedroom, and then we capped it with a maximum of 8 occupants per STR, no matter how many bedrooms you have. We have that it shall not be rented out to more than one party under separate contracts, which is basically saying that you can't rent out to, say, myself and say Mr. Dugan at the same time under different contracts. So just keep it balanced, I guess, in a way that prevents kind of the overcrowding issue that has been mentioned. The parking is 1 space per bedroom, and on-street, if they cannot meet those off-street parking requirements, then they are limited to 2 spaces on-street. However, those cannot be reserved for STR use. So those spaces are there. They can let the person who is utilizing the STR know that they're there, but also they need to know that those are not explicitly theirs for the STR use. Also, they need to have a designated contact person to be available 24/7 to respond to any concerns from renters or city enforcement officials, and this person must be able to access the STR in a timely manner in case of complaints and so on. Some of the other standards that we're proposing is that STRs will be required to have fire extinguishers, carbon monoxide detectors, smoke detectors, etc. Every STR must have ingress-egress accessibility, and this is all included in the affidavit waiver that the STR applicant would sign prior to receiving an STR permit. Noise must not extend beyond the property lines of the STR or be in excess of the city's noise regulations. The STR property must be properly maintained and free of uncollected trash, garbage, litter, and must comply with all city property codes. And also, this is pretty common for short-term rentals, the STR operator will be required to post information inside the short-term rental, which informs the guests of the city's STR regulations, information from the 24/7 contact person, maximum occupancy, parking locations, exits, so on and so forth. And this is pretty common to see if you have ever utilized a short-term rental, that oftentimes they have it like right on the the counter or posted like on a pole on the property when you walk in. Just a basic rundown of everything that's expected of the guest. So another aspect of allowing short-term rentals and having short-term rental regulations is it also would allow the city to revoke short-term rental permits after they have been issued. So any STR operating permit, and this is language taken straight from the draft, it's may be revoked for cause or suspended by the Director of Community Development after a third sustained violation of any of the following. That includes the short-term rental regulations, or ordinance which is put into place, the Englewood Municipal Code regulations, city and state sales tax regulations, or the existence of any condition that the city determines constitutes a nuisance or would possibly endanger the health of guests and the health, safety, and welfare of the population. So, in regards to the Englewood Comprehensive Plan, a couple of the goals and objectives, goal 1 and goal 2, which is the live and work goals of the comprehensive plan. Objective 1.1 is allow for housing that meets the needs of all income groups, including an appropriate type and location of housing. Similarly, objective 1.2, it allows for housing investments that improve the housing mix and serve different life cycle stages and groups with special needs in appropriate locations, etc. And objective 2.2 is create and maintain a workforce housing meeting the needs of both employers and employees. And a lot of these objectives are met with the presence of Swedish and the Swedish need to have people who can come and rent a place for a week, for a few nights, for nurses to come and work for a month, and being able to find adequate accommodations for those needs. So staff finds that is met in the comprehensive plan. So overall, the staff recommendations, as staff would say, recommend to allow short-term rentals in residential, multi-use, and medical zone districts. That was kind of listed out in this section above, which are all R districts, MU districts, and M districts. And also, staff recommends that the proposed STR regulatory text, which is included in your staff report, be forwarded to City Council with a favorable recommendation for adoption.
Any questions for Eric?
Do you have any data from the hospitals as to just how many medical staff there are that are looking for temporary housing?
I don't know the exact number of them.
So this is just anecdotal from...
So this is basically just taken from phone calls that staff has received regarding rental properties and what they could be used for. And kind of an anecdotal aspect of that is Swedish is, what I've heard is looking to find this kind of short-term housing to be able to
accommodate.
Yeah, that's kind of the word I'm looking for, but yeah, just like accommodate or just be able to find that type of housing for those traveling nurses.
So you don't have any sense of how many that is, like 1 or 2 or 50 or 60 or?
I don't know the exact number. That would be completely ballpark, and I don't feel comfortable saying without any further information on that.
Michelle.
Who was first? You go, June? Okay. Anecdotally, I have rented quite a few Airbnbs and short-term rentals, and actually the biggest source is bookings.com. It's not Airbnb or VRBO. And I would guess to your question that might fluctuate up and down depending on the caseload of perhaps professors coming in to teach or something like that, or the load at Craig, which I would think might have a greater need for families to stay close by their patients, but that's just my opinion. So.
It's just that this is the first time I've heard that particular point about the medical staff at Craig needing short-term rentals, and it would be interesting just to contact Swedish, and for me anyway, to actually know if that's a thing or not.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
For clarification purposes, we are not making recommendations on your drafts or the affidavit or the checklist in this. Is that correct? Are these included? Because I don't want to have to go through the wording on the draft of the checklist and
So
the affidavit. I know it says draft, but I want to know what we're recommending for approval.
So the recommendation, or what you're recommending for approval is strictly this draft STR ordinance.
Okay, so these are not part,
Correct.
just wanted to talk.
I was just going to add that on April 2nd, there was a guy that spoke at the forum, and he was talking all about how he rents out his accessory dwelling unit for Swedish Hospital, and he says it's constantly booked out with nurses or patients. So he said that there aren't any real hotels, like big hotels that are within a reasonable distance of the the hospital. So patients just have a hard time at that hospital compared to other ones in the Denver area.
Couple questions on the staff report.
Yeah.
You mentioned that it says, bottom of page 4, additionally, modifications to the Englewood Municipal Code will need to occur to address tax licensing regulations set forth in Title 4 and lodging licenses in Title 5. Can you just explain who will be making those modifications or recommendations for modifications?
Yeah, that would be the city attorney's office.
Okay, thank you. Clarification, I guess, on page 9, or under enforcement, it says the city has sent notice of violation letters to those addresses. Is that something that has happened, or that is something that would happen as part of enforcement in the future?
That has happened currently when staff has received notice with proper evidence that a short-term rental is taking place. We have enforced on it. And since our enforcement's complaint-based, that's what we've done so far.
Thank you. Then, other than being able to send those letters, has the city been able to do anything else right now with the Airbnbs or short-term rentals that have been operating?
Yeah.
Any other questions? Any other questions for Eric? Okay, thank you. So we will move on to public testimony. This is an opportunity for public to provide testimony regarding this case. All comments should be directed to the commission. The commission has established a 3-minute time limit on speakers. I have a list of folks here that will call forward, and then we'll have you sworn in when you come forward. First, we have Kathleen Bailey.
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm? Do you swear or affirm under the penalty of perjury that you would tell the truth in this matter before the Planning and Zoning Commission? Please state your name and who you're now. You can either state your address, you're a resident of Englewood, or which district, council district you live in, your choice.
Catherine Bailey, District 4. I often hear this commission declare their interest and emphasis on protecting property rights, not denying property rights for property owners. Yet your actions do not seem to support your expressed sentiments. Property rights are limited by zoning laws and ordinances, including the STR ordinance, designed to restrict what property owners can do with the real property that they own. The property rights argument should have been used to protect the property rights of all our property owners who select their property purchases based on the existence and protection of these decades-old restrictions that were provided. ADUs, with the exceptions of the grandfathered in, multi-unit developments in family-zone neighborhoods, and commercial enterprise of short-term rentals were not property rights in Englewood. They have not been legal in Englewood for decades. But instead of protecting the property rights of our existing Englewood citizens, this commission, under the guidance and direction from the community development, and with compliance and approval of our city council, simply changed our zoning laws to allow exceptions for ADUs and multi-unit developments where they had previously been illegal. And these zoning laws changes were made as part of the specific staff strategy intended to promote the goals set out in Englewood for a comprehensive plan that was also engineered by this commission under the guidance and direction of the community development with the compliance and approval of our councils. And now you are also seeking to legalize the commercial enterprise of short-term rentals throughout all of Englewood neighborhoods. Enforcement of the STR ordinance has always been the responsibility of Englewood's Department of Community Development, but they did not want to spend the time or money to enforce the existing law, claiming it too vague. But they also did want to spend the time to tighten the ordinance and enforce the law. And if approved, they also don't want to spend the time and money to do safety inspections. But they, in this commission, want all of us to believe that they will spend the time and money to enforce the laws and protect the neighbors if and when SDRs are made legal. Even though Denver hasn't successfully handled their own problems with STRs, please put our existing citizens first for a change. The commercial enterprise of short-term rentals has no place in our Englewood residential neighborhoods and must remain illegal in Englewood. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have C. Ann Dickerson.
Do you swear or affirm under the penalty of perjury that you will tell the truth in this matter before the Planning and Zoning Commission?
I do so swear.
Please state your name at the mic and choose however you wish to designate your location in Englewood.
Oh, before I start, there are a couple of people that I think want to speak, and they came in late.
The chair will take care of that, but thank you.
Ann Dickerson, I'm in District 1. We don't need any more regulations in Englewood. Half of our codes aren't being enforced now. Why do we need more regulations? We don't. And who's going to enforce this? Code enforcement isn't enforcing half of the codes they're responsible for. The police aren't doing it either. There was a house in my neighborhood, and there must have been 100 people a month go through there. Some spent the night, some just a couple of hours. And the police said they couldn't do anything about it. Code enforcement wouldn't even try, because she said they were all her relatives. And that somehow absolves them of any regulations. I know that the administration of regulations generally cost more than you could ever obtain from taxes or license fees or anything else. The good guys that are going to be doing this, they don't need the regulations. The bad guys don't care. You're not going to be able to enforce this, and you're going to make a big mess out of the city. I don't want anybody in my residential neighborhood, which is R1A, to have this, because I've lived it. But there are plenty of regulations on the books if they're just enforced that would stop it. Tammy Williamson had a party house next to hers. It wouldn't have mattered if there had been any regulations. There were plenty of regulations where she could have gotten rid of them, but the police wouldn't enforce it. But by persistence, she ended up not having to put up with it any longer. It went to court, and he has agreed to sell. But it had nothing to do with licensing. If he was going to do it, he'd get licensed and he'd still be a jerk. So this is ridiculous to even consider short-term rentals. The guy across the street from me built a $1.2 million house, decided he couldn't sell it, so he moved into it. He has a 2,400 square foot basement with a separate entrance. And I've seen people going in and out of there, spend the night, a couple of nights, and then leave. Parking is really ruined in our neighborhood because of it. And it's not going to make any difference. He thinks he's above the law. He will never get a license. And if he did, he would abuse it. But as far as needing a place for medical staff, there was a property at Swedish Hospital that could have been used for this. It was proposed for a hotel. Thanks to ex-mayor Penn, and a few others. It got, all the redevelopment credit was given to Rite Aid, which failed. They paid no taxes, few planning fees, few park and lieu fees, or anything, and it still failed. That is a perfect location for a hotel or a residence for medical staff.
Next we have Christian Mills.
Hi, would you already raised your right hand, sorry. Do you swear or affirm under the penalty of perjury that you will tell the truth in this matter before the Planning and Zoning Commission?
I do.
Would you please state your name?
His name is Christian Mills, 2952 South Washington Street. Thanks for listening, and I'm really surprised. I was here for the session we had last time, and I heard people talk about the studies that were happening in Europe, where more than 2 Airbnbs on a block destroyed the block, and there was interest in what this would do to communities. And now it really seems like Englewood's pro STR, which is shocking to me. I live next, there's one 3 doors down from me, and the idea that it's going to be enforced is, I'm sorry if it's laughable. The weeds are knee-high. We've called code enforcement. There are mattresses in the alley because they just throw them in the back alley when they're done. You can look in the front window and see mattresses leaning against the wall. It's the definition of a flop house. And I was surprised because the houses on my block are, they're not mansions or anything, but they're all worth about $500,000 because of where they're at. You don't have to do the math when you're getting $40, $45 a mattress to see that if you even have half occupancy, they're cash flowing about $5,000. Nobody's touching that. $40, you can get that on the corner. We just cleared out the plaque today, and that was a public nuisance and public safety. Now, where's the public safety in this? Who's responsible for a bad actor that comes in and hurts somebody on that block? We've had multiple instances where people are knocking on doors, hammered. They don't know their name. Cops want to take them to the hospital, right? They go in there. We've had a Narcan response already. 3 or 4 cop cars and ambulances. I'm assuming the person's okay. What happened? The owner transferred it to an LLC. When somebody dies or they hit somebody, there are kids on that block. Who's responsible for that? Eric, who's responsible for that? Who would be responsible? Somebody kills and it's a person who paid $35 for a mattress. Who's responsible for that? Do we want that? I know I don't, and I see it. And it's terrible. Needles in the weeds. I could go on. It's beyond not regulated. There's nobody there to take care of anything. So the idea that we can regulate it and enforce it is, I'm sorry, I don't see it. I don't have the faith. I've lived there for 19 years, and I haven't seen the ability for a response. And I don't think it's malintent. I think it's just impossible to respond to all those things. I don't think the Englewood PD can potentially respond to everything that they've got to do. So, that's it. Do you do a police record search on these houses to see how many times they get called? Those are questions. This is not just about our home values. It's about public safety, because there's something like this is going to happen. Thank you. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Next we have Joanna Marble.
I'm sorry, I signed up here. I thought it was just a sign-up sheet.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm Michelle Thompson as well. I didn't realize I was signing up to speak.
Okay, thank you. So then do we have folks who have not signed up that would like to speak?
Do you swear or affirm under the penalty of perjury that you will tell the truth in this proceeding before the Planning and Zoning Commission?
I do.
Please state your name and your address of the district you live in.
Tammy Williamson, 4198 South Washington. This whole thing is just blowing smoke up our asses. It's horrible. Why do we want to do this in our 1C? This is my zone. I used to have a quiet neighborhood. My neighbors used to get along. We had, 2 years ago, an Airbnb moved in.
Now it's hostile. The whole neighborhood is hostile, neighbor against neighbor. The guy who owns the place got to my son and he's tearing my family apart with his party house. His property managers have threatened me. They have stood outside my house. I have video of them and their group of friends standing outside my door at 8 o'clock in the morning saying, let's get this message sent. I don't want STRs in my neighborhood. I don't want them in my zone. I don't want them anywhere around me. I had to go to the hospital because I've had so many cars hit and run. I am now permanently on anti-anxiety medication. I'm having an anxiety attack right now just talking about it. This is awful. It's grotesque. It's abuse. And what? You know, we're just gonna get run over. I'm a longtime resident. But, you know, some guy from out of state can buy a house, turn it into a profit, and nothing happens. People are parking on my lawn. Nothing happens. Cops say they can't do anything. People are driving on my lawn. I have a permanent dirt track on my front lawn from people driving on my lawn. I have had my fence broken twice. I've had to pick up other people's cigarette butts out of my backyard. My dogs are out there. What if one hits them in the eye? How is this a good idea? At all. Really, it's just awful. This is tearing me apart. I am going to have a stroke, and soon, if my blood pressure does not go down and I can't relax, because I can't. You know what I have to do? I have to look up my neighbor's calendar, his rental calendar, to find out what my days off are, the days that I can sleep in my bed. And during the winter, that's only 3 days a week. During the summer, no. And you know what? The last city council meeting I went to, and I was talking about, you know, Airbnbs and how bad it was, and please shut it down, please get rid of it so I can sleep at night. You know, and it was snowing that night, and how wonderful it was to come home, find somebody from an Airbnb parked in my spot so I had to walk through the snow to get to my door. This parking thing, unenforceable. This guy, the house next to me has a huge driveway. And plus he has converted his top floor into the nursing thing. Thank you, Tammy. Into the traveling nursing thing. No nurse is gonna wanna park there. You work 48 hours, you want someone knocking on your door to move your car? It's a huge parking hassle. Thank you for your comments.
Thank you.
Eric, is there anything, or just wanted to double check any other public that want to speak? Okay. Is there one more? Okay.
Do you swear or affirm under the penalty of perjury that you would tell the truth in this proceeding before the Planning and Zoning Commission?
I do.
Please state your name and...
My name is Maureen White, and I live in the 3200 block of South Grant Street. I didn't plan on coming to speak tonight, but so I'm going to kind of skip around. I want to address the idea that Swedish needs places for families to stay or contract help. We know all about the contract help because my husband has a townhouse out at the coal mine in Sims. And the company that contracts nurses, places for the nurses to stay, used his townhouse. They were willing to go that far out. Englewood doesn't have to be the only supplier of housing for those people. And at that open forum, I believe it was, I asked, why can't empty apartment units in Englewood, and there are plenty of them, we live across the street from Apartment House, rent an apartment if they choose to. A furnished apartment for a month, 2 months, a couple weeks, whatever, they get income. Families have a walking place, a place that's within walking distance of the hospital to go and see their family member who's in the hospital. Employees of the hospital could rent some of those empty apartments. And I was told, no, that's not allowed. Well, maybe you guys on planning and zoning can figure out why that isn't allowed. And And why don't we take advantage of that resource that's out there? That night too, it came to light that the city says they don't know where these places are. And I had to laugh because the gentleman who was talking about having an ADU and keeping it constantly rented is on the corner of Logan and Floyd. And yes, those were not built with that in mind. We were not sold, the neighbors there, that that's how they could be used. But he has the symbol, he did till that night, after that night, in his yard. It's an upside down heart. They put it on the gate, they put it in the alley, they put it so the renters can come and find the place that they're supposed to be staying in as an Airbnb. So how the city's missing that, I do not know. Let's see what else. So it was interesting today, I listened to the candidates for city managers interviews, 3 of them, how often they came back to the comprehensive plan. And if you've been paying attention at all, even in a mayor-manager city meeting, where it was just the mayor pro tem, the mayor, and the city manager brought up the fact that that comprehensive plan needs to be studied and revised, updated. And that was mentioned in each one of those interviews. I don't think you all should move forward on this until that happens, at least until they start looking at the comprehensive plan. Because all of these things, the ADUs were never mentioned in all those meetings as being able to be used as STRs, never. But I always suspected that would be the plan. And now we know it, that's the plan. So ADUs, STRs, all these multi-units, they're all just more high density for Englewood. And that is a major concern right now for the residents, the majority of residents. And I think that the plan is just to look into that. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes.
Do you swear or affirm under the penalty of perjury that you will tell the truth in this proceeding before the Board of Adjustment and Appeals?
I do.
Planning and zoning.
Oh. Bad habit from 20 years.
That as well.
Thank you. Planning and Zoning Commissioner, would you please state your name if you're a resident of Englewood?
Absolutely. My name is Daniel Powell. I am a resident of Englewood, and admittedly I just had to look up what district I'm in, get you some idea of my typical level of engagement. I'm a transplant, like so many others, but I live in District 2, and I just wanted to state that I came here in order to voice my support at a basic level for anything that would be conducive to STRs in Englewood. But I want to emphasize that having heard the testimony of some of my neighbors here in Englewood, I don't know that any other or many other potential STR owners would necessarily have the same sense of urgency, but it really actually gave me pause to hear their stories, and I have a lot of humility about my own intentions here in Englewood, having heard some of the really troubling accounts of what it can be like being a neighbor adjacent to something like this. That being said, I couldn't personally in good conscience allow any sort of business venture on my own to impede on the quality of life on my neighbors like that, but it's my hope that somehow, some way, in a manner that is frankly not yet clear to me, that that the council and the zoning planning commission, that they can see their way through to something. I mean, just generally speaking, it's my suspicion that my generation is never going to waver in their enthusiasm for these sorts of things, right? So it's just going to become the demand and the enthusiasm for that. I'm kind of, I don't know, I'm kind of a nostalgic type, and I gripe a lot, and I talk about how, because I caught the tail end in my childhood. I remember when people knew their neighbors pretty well, and I liked to deride the internet and cell phones, and everyone, doesn't seem to have very good connections at the neighborhood level anymore. And it's hard to imagine how how something like this could necessarily help in that regard. But again, I just, speaking practically, pragmatically, I don't know that the demand is going anywhere. And it's my hope that somehow, given the just eventualities that I think are unavoidable, that you know, these sorts of things can somehow be mitigated. I've heard talk of code enforcement, you know, existing code and the enforcement of existing code. And, you know, there's quite a bit I don't know about the resources of Englewood and their ability to enforce existing code, be it with parking nuisance issues or, you know, all different forms of nuisance that can arise between neighbors. It sounds to me that perhaps if some of that were better enforced, even setting the STR issue aside, that might be a better world to live in. But it's my understanding and my awareness that there are presently even I've been holding off personally due to the ambiguity and the uncertainty as to how the regulatory climate here in Englewood for STRs is going to unfold. So I've been holding back, but I know that's not necessarily true of others. There are others that are more aggressive or ambitious than I. And so we're moving forward. There are existing Airbnbs in the neighborhood that I was considering doing a short-term rental. Yes, I'm sorry, I'm posing more questions than answers here, frankly, but I can only wonder, you know, how we might steer it forward, because I don't see it going away. And I'm also, lastly, I would just like to add that I've heard the sentiment, and I'd like to echo it. I'm something of a pragmatist, and I'm a bit, if not cynical, you might say jaded or realistic, would probably be the word I would use, when I hear tell of proposed new regulations by a body or by a small, like a local government that doesn't necessarily have the bandwidth or the resources to enforce existing ones. So I heard some very good points raised, and I wonder myself, I don't think anybody here wants to create a situation in which they go down that road and none of this can be enforced. So I think it's important to be realistic and pragmatic. But again, just for the benefit of those here tonight, just want to go on record as a somewhat old millennial. I'm on the older end of the spectrum, but I am all too well aware of I've obviously used short-term rentals all over the place. I'm well aware of the demand, which is increasing, but I'm not at all surprised or doubtful of any of the accounts that I've heard. I think it's fair to call them horror stories. But the notion that we can just go back in time, as much as I'm inclined to that, I don't know that we can.
Thank you.
Thank you.
One last call. Anyone else? Okay, thank you. Eric, anything additional you'd like to add or to respond to?
No, not this time.
And does anyone on the commission have additional questions for staff before we close the public hearing? No? Okay. All right, do we have a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved. Second.
All right, Ms. Fuller,
Yes.
Ms. Brown,
Yes.
Ms. Marshall,
Yes.
Ms. Austin,
Yes.
Mr. Bertinos,
Yes.
Ms.
Yes. Too many people are.
Yeah, too many people on the mics. You can only have so many.
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Freemeyer,
Aye.
Mr. Kinton,
Yes.
And Mr. Townley, or excuse me, Chair Townley.
Yes.
Sorry. It was a long night last night, folks. I'm so sorry.
Okay, to open up the floor for discussion. Anyone want to start?
Well, I'll ask the simple question. What is the goal of what we're trying to do tonight?
It would be to put forward a motion, a recommendation to City Council on the draft ordinance that's been put together.
Okay, so moved.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear a motion.
I said so moved.
And what is your motion?
To put forward the staff report and supporting materials to City Council. Is that correct, Madam Chair?
It's the ordinance.
The ordinance, yes.
Okay. So recommend, so if I just want to make sure I'm getting the motion correctly. Your motion is to recommend to City Council, your motion is to recommend City Council approve the short-term rental ordinance. Is that correct? Okay, I just want to make sure I get it right.
I'll second that.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor. Discussion.
So, I've been going back and forth on this for the last 2 weeks, thinking about my responses to this, and the one part, I agree that we need regulation. I'm okay with short-term rentals being accessory uses to one's own personal dwelling, that you can rent out a space in your own home or rent your home for a week while you're on vacation. But the one part that I have a problem with is where we allow short-term rentals in ADUs. Because I think that's the source of the problem. It would be fine if our regulations, and certainly some of the apartments, it would be fine if the regulations said an person who lives in an ADU could rent their home as a short-term rental in the same way that a person who owns their home. But the way it's written, it allows the ADU to be maintained as a permanent short-term rental. And I believe that this negates the claim that it supports objectives live 1 and 1.2 and work 2.2. Because in fact, the idea of having an ADU was to increase the number of rental properties available to long-term residents, and that was part of the rationale behind allowing ADUs. If you allow ADUs to be used solely as STRs, then they take properties out of the long-term rental, and they become the sources of the kinds of problems that we're hearing. And so I don't think that I can support this if we can't fix that part. I'd also like to comment that the lessons learned from the Denver people who came to speak said that active enforcement of the regulations is key to the success. And they felt that allowing short-term rentals can be very good for a neighborhood or it can be very bad, and the key to that is enforcement. And so I think it is incumbent upon City Council, if ultimately they pass this, that they mandate and fund active enforcement by a staff that is fully supportive and dedicated to maintaining the order, to getting rid of nuisance properties and eliminating the bad actors. Thanks.
I would accept a friendly amendment to limit the amount of time that ADUs could be used for a short-term rental, if you would like to propose that. I think that that's a valid point and would make the proposed language better. I'm very sympathetic to the people we heard from today, and all I can say is that part of the problems that you have all experienced are in some respects because we don't have any way to regulate these things at this point in time. They're going on anyway. So I think what our intent was as a commission was to work with staff to develop a set of rules and regulations, albeit we have to rely on code enforcement and others, community development and others to make sure that STRs in the future are not the problems that you have presented today. I don't doubt for a minute of what you guys have presented today. But I'm a pragmatist, and these short-term rentals are happening. I can't turn a blind eye to that, and I think that this proposed language will help in the long run.
So do we have a friendly amendment? Or do you want to add an amendment to the motion?
Sure. I hadn't thought about that particular option, that ADUs could be limited in the number of times they're used as a short-term rental. So I'll throw it out there 4 times a year.
I actually wanted to add on too. I'm not sure when I mentioned this, but a few meetings ago, I expressed interest in, I don't know how easy this would be to regulate, but putting a cap on how often you are to rent out your home in a month, in a year, because then we could avoid like people, because a primary residence is supposed to be defined as the place you live more than 50% of the year. So technically you shouldn't be renting out your apartment for more than 50% or home, more than 50% of the year. But it would be tricky to regulate, but I would be open to adding that restriction to the whole thing. So it wouldn't just be ADUs, it would be primary as well, if anyone else is interested.
Madam Chair, I believe you have 2 issues on the table. The first is the initial friendly amendment. The second would be an additional amendment should we choose to move forward, just as a point of clarification. So you'd want a second to the first.
And do we have a second for Carolyn's amendment in terms of ADUs?
I'll second that.
I had further questions about it. When you said 4 times a year, did you mean 4 days out of the year? Or for rentals?
I would like to see a little more input from others on this, because that's just off the top of my head. My goal in this is to allow people who have an ADU to occasionally rent it if they have the option, but not keep an ADU that is only maintained as a short-term rental, because I think that becomes a source of the kind of problems we can see.
And on that point, I was initially, I agreed with you that I thought having ADUs as an STR would be really problematic because of the separation between the primary residence of the owner and the ADU. And to me, what changed my mind on that point was the feedback that we received from Denver. And they took the position that their experience has been that the short-term rentals, that if you're doing it in an ADU, that's one of the best scenarios that you can have because the owner's actually on the property. And I was surprised by their position on that point because I was expecting exactly the opposite.
I was just going to propose a number for ADU limits, maybe 3 days per month, because then that would account for maybe one person's stay in your home once per month.
My problem with any of that is there's no way to enforce it. We discussed at length in many of these meetings about having to pay a company that would have to monitor how often this was advertised, who had one, etc. There's no way to know how many times that is rented out. There was no way, even with a paid monitor, for us to determine that number. So it's going to be right back to where we are, which is signing an affidavit and then fielding complaints, which is where we are already. So I don't know that adding an additional requirement gets us anywhere different than where we are today, because all we have is a signed affidavit saying that they're going to follow the rules, and then enforcement by complaint. So I don't know what we get by adding another rule. So that's fine.
I think one of the things, I hear what you're saying in terms of wanting to have a limitation on the ADUs, and the reasoning why ADUs were one of the reasons why they were initially put forward. But I think we're also considering a different case in a different situation right now, and ADUs are allowed. However, people want to use them, essentially. I don't see why we would put a restriction on ADUs and not put a restriction on all of them then. And I think we did have discussions at length that we didn't want to put a day limit or anything like that in terms of how many times things could be rented. So I think it would be hard for me to single out ADUs, that it would need to be all uses or none. And I also think because we haven't allowed multifamily units to be part of this ordinance, that we're not taking those out of the rental market in terms of, not having as many rentals, apartments and things like that. So that's my thought on it.
The other point to me that I thought was helpful, one way that we addressed it was saying that if you have an ADU, you can't use both your home and the ADU as a short-term rental. So that restricts the use of part of the property. You have the homeowner on the property living in one of the structures. So that makes it so that somebody living on the property, that the owner's going to be there most of the time. That to me helps address some of the concerns that I heard about how houses are being used. That one of the restriction, the testimony we heard tonight highlighted to me why it's so important that we have resident ownership, because it sounds like some of the problems that people are dealing with are the result of people, absentee landlords that aren't part of the community, that are renting out their houses full-time. They're making money here, but they're not living here. And that to me was one of the important changes that we made, that you can't do that anymore.
And I truly appreciate all the time that this commission has put into discussing this and going round and round. The caution that I feel after listening to the people from Denver and listening to the testimony tonight is that, as the people from Denver pointed out, with allowing STRs, we are inserting commercial ventures into a residential neighborhood. And by allowing an ADU to be maintained solely for the purposes of being a short-term rental, I think we've pushed that boundary too far. And it can go too far into destroying the kind of neighborhood we've got.
And just to be clear, did you say for your friendly amendment 4 times?
Okay, I'll say
Because we'll have to vote on that.
Okay, I will say 4 occasions per year.
It might be easy just to say contracts.
That's just fine.
4 contracts per year, okay.
Did I understand your point correctly, that you were saying that one of our original purposes for allowing ADUs was to help the housing supply, And this would not help the housing supply because it would be used for short-term rather. Is that correct? Okay, so I would agree with that point. I would agree with that point. I mean, I think it does conflict with our original goal on allowing ADUs, and I have some issues with that. I mean, obviously, as was pointed out, having the owner on the property does alleviate a lot of problems, but I still have a lot of issues with, having that kind of I still have concerns with that for the reasons that were mentioned.
Okay, should we go ahead and do a vote on the friendly amendment?
Okay, you ready? Ms. Fuller,
No.
Ms. Brown,
No.
Ms. Marshall,
Yes.
Ms. Austin,
No.
Mr. Patinos.
No.
Go back to my first page. Mr. Freemeyer,
No.
Mr. Kenton,
Can I abstain, or do I have to?
unfortunately, you cannot.
Okay. I will vote no because I don't think it's sufficient. Thank you.
Chair Townley,
No.
motion fails. So now we're back to the original motion, unless we have a motion from Ms. Fuller and seconded for her consideration. Does she
No
have-
longer.
No longer? Okay. So we're on the original motion.
And Carolyn, did you want to add a motion? You also mentioned something about the enforcement piece, or did you want to add that to the motion, the original motion?
I don't know what's possible for us to do, but it seems to me we really need a strong department that will investigate and act if we're going to bring short-term rentals on board. And so, but I don't know where that can be included in this.
I'll do my best to give a summary here. We have a code today that does not contemplate short-term rentals. Regardless of whether we like them or not is immaterial, they're happening. And so the question becomes, what if anything would be the role of the city in trying to regulate and or alleviate and or bring some order to where there today is no order? And so the notion comes down to, should we regulate property or should we not regulate property? And if we do regulate property, in what zone districts do we regulate that? And or allow short-term rentals or not? And all the specifics thereof. And we have studied this ad nauseum. I believe 27 months. I think it's gone to the council informally once, formally once, gone to the public twice, and here we are again in a public hearing. So ultimately, while we don't necessarily envy the job we have to do of making a decision as volunteers for what we hope to be for the betterment of the community, we do, by virtue of the fact we agreed when we volunteered and said, yes, pick me, we get to do such wonderful tasks. So I can appreciate the fact that I don't particularly like regulations in and of themselves. I don't particularly like the fact that if you drive past Walmart, it's 25 miles an hour and people do 40 miles an hour and the police don't enforce that. If enough people do that, enough people complain, the police actually have an ordinance to go to that says the speed limit is 25 miles an hour and we shall enforce it at that point. If there is no recognition that there is a speed limit of any kind, then reasonable and proper would rule the day, and reasonable and proper for me may be different than for somebody else. And so therefore we have the notion that we must regulate in some fashion that would be reasonable and prudent. So the notion that we don't recognize that which is a reality in our community, I think is failing the community. I think if the council fails to act, it's failing the community. I think that we've had a huge amount of input into this, and going around, at literally, and not to be redundant, but ad nauseum about all the tweaks and variances and ifs, ands, and wherefores, and have contemplated that in detail, and had multiple staff members to also give us direction in terms of, yeah, but, and what about this? And so the question ultimately comes down to, I think, a larger issue of code enforcement. That is not our decision. Code enforcement is the decision of the city council to do that which they've empowered the police chief to do, and it's up to the mayor and council to enforce that which they have voted in, and we have elected them, whether we voted them or not. They are our elected officials. It's their choice whether they choose to force enforcement of our laws. And arguably, and in multiple areas, I can see where they do a horrific job of that. And I think it needs to improve. That said, that still doesn't address this. And this is our best shot at short-term rentals and trying to not over-regulate and under-regulate, but protect the citizens. Because part of regulation is not just the people who would have a short-term rental, it's also to help the people that would be next to and or affected by a short-term rental and give the city the ability by code to be able to do something different than what they can do today. And I think this allows them to do it. Is it perfect? No. Will it be modified in the future? Yes. We would like to think we will know something different 5 years from now, 2 years from now, 10 years from now than what we do today. Right now, what we know is we have a problem, and this is, in my opinion, after 27 months, the best shot that we have to regulate and to enforce and to help residents as opposed to harm them. So I will be voting yes.
Okay. Do we have any other motions on the table, or can we go with the original motion? Okay, are we ready to call the vote?
Are you calling the question, Chair? Thank you. All right. Ms. Fuller,
Yes.
Ms. Brown,
For all of the reasons that Mr. Creamer so eloquently stated, I vote yes.
Ms. Marshall,
Because of my concern over allowing ADUs to be used as permanent short-term rentals, I vote no.
thank you. Ms. Austin,
Yes.
Mr. Patinos,
Yes. There were a couple of other things that I just wanted to emphasize that I think are important things that we included that address some of the concerns that we heard tonight that haven't been brought up yet. One of those is the insurance requirement that if there is harm to the house or neighboring owners, that was something that we went back and forth on, and I think the testimony that we heard tonight makes it more clear that having the insurance requirement is something that's good both for the homeowners and for the neighborhood. Another point that we heard tonight that was just the cost of homeownership in Englewood is increasing dramatically as it is throughout the metro area. That's one of the benefits of the program, that by addressing the cost of homeownership and having a requirement that prohibits non-resident owners from renting short-term rentals and requires the homeowners to be on the property. We're providing a pathway, especially for younger people, to be able to move into Englewood and actually purchase a home. And then the third point is that unlike a lot of the code sections that we add, there's a revenue stream that's tied because of the taxes that will be generated that we're not currently capturing. This code section provides a mechanism to be able to provide the enforcement mechanisms that were I think that was the clearest point that we heard from every single person that gave testimony tonight, that it's not acceptable for the city to pass this type of regulation and then not enforce it. And because of the revenue stream that's being generated, the city council and the appropriate authorities should be enforcing it.
all right, thank you. Mr. Freemeyer,
Yes.
Mr. Kinton?
For the reasons expressed, even with the concerns about the ADUs being used, the status quo is not okay, and as we've discussed much, this is hopefully a way to improve it with the compliance and enforcement mechanisms that we can only recommend to be implemented. But yeah, I vote yes.
And Chair Townley?
I vote yes. We know that short-term rentals are happening in Englewood, and we need an avenue to be able to regulate and permit them. We do appreciate everyone who's come forward tonight, and I think we definitely hear what people are saying, and we're hoping that what we've put forward will also help address what those concerns are. I think we need to be nimble in the sense to be able to, address changing technologies and changing things that are happening, and we have to be able to come up with regulations to address the changes that are happening in our city. I think the fact that we put in the owner-occupied requirement definitely makes it more restrictive than in some other communities, and our owner-occupied are existing citizens of Englewood. I would also say that we currently have no hotels and very limited lodging in our community, and this is an opportunity for my friends and family who just stayed in Centennial all weekend to actually be able to stay within 4 miles of my home. So I would appreciate having more opportunities for lodging within our community. I also think that the draft ordinance meets many goals of the comp plan that we put forward in the staff report in terms of having more balanced mix of housing, having opportunity for workforce housing, and also opportunities to encourage diversity in terms of business types and being able to create avenues or revenues for our citizens in the community as well. I do want to recommend that the City Council really look into ways to bolster enforcement, possibly looking at a third party to help community development staff with enforcement, and also to bolster code enforcement as well. So I vote yes.
Motion passes.
Does anyone need a break before we move into the next public hearing? Good.